The Saskatchewan fall legislative sitting wraps up today. This week, we found out about $1 billion in spending from the government. This after last week's report of a more than a $420 million projected deficit. Our political panel is here to break this down and look back at the highlights of the sitting. Murray Mandryk is a political columnist, and our provincial affairs reporter is Alexander Quon. Alex, let's start with you. This $1 billion spend, what are the details?
So it emerged during a committee meeting this week that an additional expense of $813 million is required for Sask Power, the province's electrical utility. It also heard an extra $194 million is needed to pay for carbon price fuel charges the province didn't collect. In total, that's nearly $1 billion in extra spending. Now, the NDP immediately raised this as a red flag. They say that it's an issue that the government is essentially introducing this spending without really any kind of prior talk or conversation about this. I will note that Finance Minister Jim Ryder says the spending won't change the province's bottom line. He told media yesterday the extra spending was already included in the mid-year financial report, which, as you mentioned, is projected a $427 million deficit.
And Alex, what's the reaction from the minister responsible for the Crowns and the opposition?
Well, it has been a very heated past few days in question period and then also outside of question period in the scrums with media. Jeremy Harrison had a 20-minute scrum with us where he was very defensive, went on to attack the NDP leader for Carla Beck for not being in the legislature. It was very clear they didn't necessarily want to talk about this. He seemed more interested in talking on anything but this topic. The NDP have also said this is an issue that we're going to look at closely, we're concerned about. So it has produced sparks for the final few days of this sitting.
So, Murray, this has everything, right? Government spending, carbon taxes coming back for us. Minister Harrison weighing in on the procedure in the House. What do you make of this?
Well, cut my mic off when this rant gets long because it's everything that's wrong with government in general, everything that's wrong with old governments, everything that's wrong with this particular government at this time, and that everything is summed up in accountability to the public. Go back to last June, I think it was, when they dropped $10 billion worth of taxpayer spending in the Crown annual reports in one single day, not in Regina, but in a city where reporters probably were ill-prepared to have to deal with that in the best of circumstances. And we didn't get to ask questions like how Sask Power is going to be affected at that particular time by its added costs, which are realistic, which need to be explored, which taxpayers need to understand because we are going to get hit with rate hikes. But the strategy out there, and this is a strategy that seems to be increasingly driven by politics and the political needs. We see them appointing people that are ex-candidates or future candidates to political positions, to communication positions. We're seeing them communicating in a way where they're pulling ministers out of scrums when they should be sort of explaining this issue or off on tangents like Alec mentioned related to Jeremy Harrison and Carla Beck's attendance in question period. Who cares about her attendance in question period? She's the opposition leader. Why is Jeremy Harrison and Scott Moe, of all people, talking about somebody's attendance in question period when they spend more time during the session off on trips abroad or else and not doing their job than anybody? Once again, it all comes under the umbrella of accountability to people. What people need to know, what they should be knowing about, is how is this going to affect my taxes? How is this going to affect my power rates? How is realistically, how big a problem actually is this? Because you are spending more money, and you'd have to be a damn idiot not to understand that that's going to eventually be a situation where you're having to pay for it. That's the responsibility of Jeremy Harrison, of Scott Moe, to basically explain that. That's the responsibility of communication people to sort of explain why they're doing this and what's going to happen. there's this arrogance in here in this unwillingness to do so, that somehow we're not accountable to people because we've been in for a long time. We keep getting reelected, and we're just generally not interested in being. You're not stopping this rant, so I better. But this is where I think we're running into problems, and that, unfortunately, it's a horrible way to end a session that should have been about other things.
And speaking of other things, Alex, we'll set people's minds back to the throne speech, which seems like a long time ago now, but it wasn't. One of the major policy pieces from the government was their push for involuntary drug treatment and putting that into legislation. Where are we at on that?
Yes, so it was a big part of their throne speech. It was billed as their solution to dealing with the ongoing addictions crisis and drug overdoses in Saskatchewan. But it's been kind of absent. It hasn't been talked about. It hasn't been introduced. I have confirmed that it will be introduced as a piece of legislation today. This is the final day of the sitting. They will introduce it. I think one of the major things is its absence. It has been billed as a key piece of their toolkit. It's something that they think is necessary to have, but it's also something they're introducing on the final day of the sitting. That means it will not pass until at least the spring sitting. So if it's such a big tool that is necessary, why is it only coming now?
And it's a good point, Alex. And also, this is something that wasn't opposed to by the NDP. I know the NDP was looking at some of the legalities of this legislation, but in theory, they could have put it in earlier and tried to get the NDP support and pass this, Murray. What do you make of that?
Yeah, you guys are right. It's bizarre to me that they didn't make the centerpiece of their fall sitting, I get what I think they're doing. Which is basically exploring this legislation for its pitfalls, which are human rights violations, which are a whole bunch of legal things that it's probably a good thing for it to sit on the order paper and passed in the spring. That said, if it's as crucial and important as you say it is, isn't there some desire to promote it, to maybe get it passed earlier? I think that they're actually winning on this one, and I'm a little surprised. But as you point out, Wabkanu is doing the same thing in Manitoba. As you guys point out, the NDP aren't opposing this, and this would be, I think, something the NDP would naturally oppose. But I think the government focusing on law and order and maybe helping people in this particular way is a good narrative for them to be doing so. I think that's where they actually have won a bit this session. I think where the NDP have won a bit this session is raising issues related to cost of living, to the bread and butter, meat and potato issues that hit home to people. I think they needed to be doing more of that as opposed to what we just heard in terms of Nicole Assar talking about the constitutionality of notwithstanding clause use in Alberta, where they have a teacher's problem. We had a teacher's problem a year or 2 years ago, but we don't have one right now. So why that tends to be their focus right now as to what they should be focusing on is interesting. Oppositions lose focus in the same way governments do, and I think we've seen opposition go hither and yon this session in madly off in all directions when they really needed to be focused on a couple things that work for them. I think what's working for them is healthcare delivery and lack thereof and problems. I think what's working for them is things like rent control, although I'm not 100% sure that translates into new votes for the NDP or any other issue. But the cost of living,
affordability.
Affordability is a big thing. And given we're seeing with the government right now in terms of the budget, the cost, the rising debt that's going to result in taxes, and what's going on in Sask Power, they do tie together nicely. It's the opposition job to tie those things together nicely, and I don't think they particularly did because they didn't do enough of the hard work, heavy lifting when it comes to things like the budget, Sask Power, and other stuff. But I think they might have scored other things in the generic notion that it's becoming more expensive to live in this province under this particular government, and you're getting less services. They have to really tie it together as to why that is. And the government certainly has no explanation right now as to why that is.
Alex, Murray touched on a few things that were themes throughout the fall sitting. We talked about law and order. We talked about, Murray touched on healthcare and the opposition flagging those things. What stands out to you over the past few weeks?
For me, I think it's the kind of increasingly hostile tone in the House. Like there is, especially during question period, it was getting heated throughout this week. The two sides obviously frequently go back and forth. They kind of jeer each other as it goes. But in the last few question periods, it's been getting out of hand. The speaker has been stepping in, and I think, it's normal, but it is kind of showing how they are not getting along at all. Like even though there is some maybe agreement on subjects, they do not want to have that agreement, I think, shown in public. So
Yeah, it's not really the Christmas spirit, Murray. We're used to that. And they don't even have you to blame for getting their dander up. You mentioned something as well, Murray, that I want to touch on briefly is appointments. And we have Sandra Masters, the former mayor of Regina, and Jean Mikowski, a former MLA and cabinet minister, both now working in the premier's office.
Well, it never works well in reverse. It sometimes works very well if you have a political aide that goes up through the ranks and becomes a political leader, a political candidate. And I can think of a couple of pretty good examples in Saskatchewan of that. I can think of Dustin Duncan. I can think of a guy named Brad Wall, whatever he's doing right now when he's not tweeting. That was actually pretty good in the politics after becoming a political aide for a considerable amount of time. It doesn't work particularly well in reverse, where you have a candidate or a potential candidate thrust in a position that they're unaccustomed to, perhaps like Sandra Masters in terms of communication, trying to deliver that effective strategy. You need actually someone from the outside basically to say, hey, look, I'm looking at this from a fresh set of eyes of how people might want to have a specific amount of information and not what's good for the party or what's good for my electoral future. And I think that doesn't work nearly as well as it does in reverse. So I think that's where the problem is.